Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, to the Canby Planning Commission meeting for March 28th, 2022. We will start by rising for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. The next part of our agenda is our consent items. It appears that we do not have any consent items, so we will move on from there on to citizen input on non-agenda items. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address the Planning Commission on non-agenda items. Each person will be given 3 minutes to speak. Staff and the Planning Commission will make every effort to respond to questions raised during citizens' input before the meeting ends or as quickly as possible thereafter. I do not see anybody online that wishes to speak, do we?
No, I don't believe we do, Chair Patton. And just the folks behind me, I'm not sure if they are here for the food carts or if they would like to testify during citizen input.
I did offer if they wanted to, and they said they're good for now.
Okay.
So we'll see what happens in a minute. Okay, so with that, there's no citizen input. We move on from item 3 to item 4, which is new business, which there appears to be none. So we will then move on to number 5, which is our public hearing.
And I'll turn it over to Brianna Donna.
Okay, I'm assuming I read this first, correct? Okay, so tonight there is one matter before the hearing body that requires a public hearing. All interested persons in attendance shall be heard on the matter. If you wish to testify on these matters, please fill out a comment card and give the recording secretary and give it to the court recording secretary. When your name is called, please step forward to the microphone, state your name and the interest in the matter. Those people that are interested in testifying as either proponents or opponents, please indicate your desire to speak by raising your hands at that time. For longer presentations, proponents and opponents may buy time from one another. In doing so, those either in favor or opposed may allocate their time to a spokesperson who will represent the entire group. All questions must be directed through me, the Planning Commission Chair. Any evidence to be considered must be submitted to the hearing body for public access. All written testimony received both for and against shall be summarized by staff and presented briefly to the hearing body during the staff report. The public hearing will be conducted as follows. There will be a staff report, questions, if any, by the hearing body or staff. There will be an open public hearing for testimony. Proponents will be allowed 5 minutes to speak. Opponents will be allowed 5 minutes to speak. We will then close the public hearing for testimony. Questions, if any, by the hearing body will be asked, and then we will move into our discussion. A decision shall be made by the hearing body at the close of the hearing on each matter, or it will be continued to a date certain in the future. This will be the only notice of that date you will receive. Does anyone have any questions about the procedure of the public hearing? Fantastic. Then I will pass things over to Brianna so she can take us away.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Chair Patton. Hello, commissioners. Nice to see everybody in person. Hello, everybody. My name is Brianna. I'm an associate planner with the city of Canby, and it's been almost a year coming. We are here to officially discuss the text amendment 22-01 for food cart pods. So a project overview. The goal is to incorporate food cart pods into the Canby Municipal Code and create pathways to permitting pods as well as individual mobile food vendors. Here's a very summarized timeline. Starting in May is really when we push this off. That's actually my birthday, so I got to go on a food cart pod tour on my birthday, which was wonderful. And that's when I started to really also dig into the other codes. The other codes we looked at were from Hillsborough, Beaverton, Portland, Happy Valley, Oregon City, Milwaukee, and Lake Oswego. In August, we held our first joint work session. It was a general discussion. The City Council and Planning Commission were both there. And it was a decision to pursue food cart pods for our code. That joint work session had our Economic Development Director, Jamie Stickle, as well. So I'm going to touch on a little bit of what her role was in just a second. Our second work session was in November. We looked at the kind of code comparisons and did some site analysis from the food cart pod tour. And we kind of took away some, general design concepts from that work session. At the end of January, we had a only Planning Commission work session to do a sort of first look at the code language that I drafted. You all gave me some wonderful edits, comments, ideas. I incorporated those. And now here we are, March 28th. This is our first official public hearing for the text amendment. So we're here to refine it. If there's any public discussion, we're happy to hear it. And ultimately, I am hoping we can recommend adoption of this text amendment to City Council. So local business outreach, this was primarily Jamie's work, so I'm kind of passing it on in her name. She does wonderful work with local businesses in the community. And so at the very start of this discussion about food cart pods, we heard some concerns about local businesses kind of losing businesses or losing business to the pods. And so Jamie did some really great outreach here, and we have some quotes. So Mallory from Gwen's Coffee House, the more food downtown, the better it is for all businesses, including hospitality, because food attracts people and good food attracts even better. Ken Aragati from The Backstop says it's another choice and it keeps diners local. I would take local food carts over corporate chains, and I would love to go. And I loved that little I would love to go at the end, because our local business owners are also members of our community, and who doesn't love, more choice? And then lastly, Matt Morrissey from Wayward Sandwiches said, adding a food cart pod downtown will continue to draw more and varied consumers, which can only serve to help all downtown businesses in the long term. A rising tide lifts all boats. A food cart pod, if done correctly, will only enhance the desirability of downtown as a destination. So overall, we did find that a lot of the local businesses were accepting and even excited about this idea. These come from our previous work sessions. I was asked to give some definitions for some terms kind of specific to this chapter. I do want to mention we have an entire section in our code that is just definitions, and these will be added there. And there are lots of other terms, that are incorporated into this chapter that are already defined elsewhere. But specifically, mobile food vending unit, which I call a food cart, kind of throughout the code chapter, but the specific definition is a vehicle or trailer designed to be portable and not affixed to any structure from which food made to order is vended, sold, served, displayed, offered for sale, or given away. The vehicle must not require a special permit from the Oregon Department Transportation to be moved. And that definition, that last sentence there, the Oregon Department of Transportation, that kind of gives a little flexibility to what the actual vehicle can be without requiring additional permitting or licensing. So food cart pod is a site containing space for one or more food carts and associated amenities under common management on private property. And I have in parentheses here number of carts. At the end, I hope we have a robust discussion. And I wanted to bring up the idea of what is a minimum number of carts to constitute a pod? Because if it's one, if they meet all of our standards, it could be a pod, but that's not really the goal of a pod, is just to have one food cart. We have other avenues for that. So I was thinking perhaps a minimum threshold of carts might be appropriate, so we can talk about that. And then lastly, hard surface, which we just did not have in the code before and is helpful, means an area covered in whole or in part with asphalt, concrete, interlocking brick or block, stone, wood, or non-porous material. All right. So here are the draft code sections. I am going to be thorough, but hopefully quick, because this is the first public hearing and public viewing of this code in its entirety. I do have pretty much all of the language verbatim, but we're going to go quickly, and then we can discuss any push points. So we have the purpose, applicability, admin. Those are all kind of stock. And then the site and amenity standards will go through the individual cart standards, the parking, utilities, and signage. And then we just had one standard specific to the industrial zones. So the purpose of this chapter is to establish criteria for the placement of food cart pods in the city of Canby. Food carts encourage local business and provide the community a wider choice of eating and drinking options. Food cart pods shall comply with all applicable city, county, and state standards. Okay, and we jump into this chapter applies to new food cart pods, as well as renovation or redevelopment of existing food cart pods. I'll mention we don't have any right now, but thinking in the future, if we do have one that would like to update, we want to be open to that. This chapter does not apply to individual food carts that have obtained a temporary mobile food vendor permit. Any person engaged in delivery, exhibition, sale, or offering of food for a period of time not to exceed 2 hours during any 24-hour period. We have that carved out for very specific, it's my idea is always a lunch hour. Someone's going to come literally serve food for just that lunch hour and then head out. We don't need a permit for that. And then lastly, food carts or other mobile vending units that are approved as part of a city reviewed event, such as a farmer's market or a block party. Here are the zones we are proposing to allow food cart pods. It's essentially everything except residential zones. We do have the residential commercial zone in there. There are very few parcels that are actually zoned with that zoning district. And if they were to come in, we could see if we could make it work. I'm not really anticipating seeing it there. Really, we're looking at the industrial park and hopefully downtown.
So just real quick, so I think I understand this is, now play nice. Okay, there we go. Just for clarification, when it's the zone CR, the residential commercial, those are some of the houses that are outside of the downtown core that like are residences now, but once they become a business, then they're a business moving forward forever for that period of time, correct?
Yeah, if they are residential now, they can stay residential as long as they wish. If they want to redevelop, they'll have to probably intensify.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah. All right, next section is administration. We've decided this will be a type 2 process, which requires public notice and a public comment period. It will be decided on a staff level because all of the standards that we've created are clear and objective. They're not subjective. A business license will be required for the actual pod. The fee for a pod is going to be $2,000. That's a one-time fee for the actual pod developer. The cart owners don't have anything to do with that fee. That's specifically for the pod owner. We cover fire, life, and safety, the process to appeal the decision. An appeal would come to Planning Commission as a type 3. The permit expiration is 1 year, and then, rules that allow us to revoke or suspend the permit if there's a violation. So that's our admin. Now we're going to jump into the standards. Okay, we're starting first with site standards. So food cart pod site standards. Food carts and amenities shall be located on a hard surface. Food carts and amenities shall not occupy pedestrian walkways. Pods shall not occupy or obstruct bicycle or vehicle parking required for an existing use. That's important. Carts and accessories shall not occupy fire lanes or other emergency vehicle access areas. So far, pretty standard. Setbacks for a pod shall be the same as the zone in which it is located, except when a side or rear yard abuts a residential zoning district. Those setbacks will be a minimum of 20 feet or the minimum setback for the zone, whichever is greater. Carts shall not be located or oriented in a way that requires customers to queue in a driveway or right-of-way. Uses shall not create tripping hazards in circulation areas with items including but not limited to cords, hoses, pipes, cables. Carts shall be separated by a minimum of 6 feet. And food carts shall not be limited in the vision clearance areas as described in our code. The pod must have a perimeter with clear entrance and exit points. This can be achieved by using landscaping, fencing, existing buildings, or topography, or a mixture of these elements. Fences shall not be chain link with or without slats. Landscaping for pods is as required in the underlying zoning district. Plants must be installed permanently or located in planters not smaller than 20 gallons. Nursery pots are prohibited. And lastly, lighting is in accordance with the LZ2 lighting district is required as regulated in our code. So those are all of our site standards. We focus primarily on access, safety, comfort. So those are the site standards. Next, we're going to jump into amenity standards. These are elements that we want to encourage, but also want to make sure that they do meet our minimum idea of what they will look like. All pods which provide seating for customers shall have restrooms with hand washing facilities available during operating hours. Restrooms must have hand washing facilities with hot and cold running water, soap, and paper towels or air dryers in an interior space. Restrooms shall be screened from view of the public right-of-way and abutting residential zoned properties. All food carts and custom amenities within a food cart pod shall be served by a 5-foot minimum hard surface walkway. Waste and recycling receptacles shall be provided for customer and business waste. Receptacles shall be screened from view of the right-of-way and residentially zoned properties and serviceable by the waste hauler. Storage structures accessory to food carts shall be less than 120 square feet in size and no greater than 15 feet in height. Storage structures shall be set back a minimum of 20 feet from public rights-of-way. Structures used to provide shelter to customers may not be tensile structures such as tents or canopies unless they are fully framed with no movable parts. Tensile structures which require stake and rope support are prohibited. I got some help from an architect friend writing that one. Just want to give him a shout out. I did a lot of research about tensile structures. 6 permanent structures must meet the dimensional standards of the underlying zone. Weather protection elements must be immovable by patrons. If individual umbrellas are utilized, they must be permanently affixed. Screening elements, similarly, may include landscaping, fencing, existing buildings, topography, or a mix. Fences with chain link with their without slats are not allowed. And you must follow our outdoor lighting standards. That's included in amenities as well as site because we want them to meet the minimum illumination, but we also want them to meet the fixtures. So it's kind of 2 sides of the same coin. Okay, so those are the amenities, the pod amenities. Now we're jumping into a third subcategory of the individual carts. Individual carts. Food carts shall enclose or screen from view from the right-of-way and abutting residentially zoned property all accessory items not used by customers, including tanks, barrels, grills, smokers, or other accessories. The wheels and tongues must remain on the food cart and wheels must remain inflated. And food carts shall be kept in good repair and maintained in a safe and clean condition. They may not have missing siding or roofing. Food carts shall not be longer than 26 feet and carts shall not exceed 15 feet in height. Food carts shall obtain and keep current a City of Canby business license. That is a yearly license that each individual cart owner will need to maintain. Food carts shall also maintain all required licenses by other local agencies, including specifically the food handler's card from Clackamas County Health, Housing, and Human Services. And if it is provided, a cart awning shall have at least 7 feet of clearance between the ground and awning for safe pedestrian circulation. And that is all we have for the individual carts. You can see there are fewer requirements for the individual carts. We're really putting more of the onus on the pod owner to kind of make it a cohesive experience. The carts and the cart owners can take their carts anywhere. So we want to have enough regulations that the pod does meet our standards, but not so many individual cart standards that it would preclude them from coming here. Okay, jumping into parking. They must meet the dimensional standards in our code. 1610 is already well set up for our dimensional standards in parking. Really, we're only looking at the ratios. So here we're showing 1.5 spaces per cart in the CR C2 and CM zones. The downtown commercial zone, coming from input from the work session, will not have any parking requirements. And we have a lower requirement in the industrial zones because we want to encourage hopefully a pod establishing there. We also have a carve out where if you're within the industrial park specifically, you are eligible for a 10% or 5 space reduction in required parking, whichever is less. And to qualify, the applicant must quantitatively show that there is existing unutilized parking on the parcel. So it will be a very specific situation. If that were to come to us, we would need parking counts for the existing use, as well as parking counts generated for the pod. Bicycle parking is required at 0.5 parking spaces per cart or per cart space. If there is existing bicycle parking accessible to patrons and within 50 feet of the site, lower bicycle parking counts may be accepted on a case-by-case basis. Again, this is kind of thinking of if we're downtown or if we're in the industrial park and a plaza already has significant bike parking very close, that can be a consideration. But again, it would be very specific and we would need to look at it case by case. The 0.5, I know that sounds kind of awkward, but if you think logically of a bike staple, it automatically is 2 spaces. You know, you can't kind of only have one side of a bike parking space unless you smush it right up against the wall, and we have dimensional standards that preclude that. So really it's 1 space is 2 spaces. So it's kind of being double counted, but we don't want it to get too high. So that's kind of why we positioned it at 0.5. Utilities. We talked about this at length during the work sessions. We hopefully answered a lot of your questions in the materials here. But in the code, we do have it distilled. You must underground permanent utilities and screen temporary utilities. The power source must be permanent. Can't have overhead wires or generators. And wastewater and potable water, there are 2 options. You can either connect to the existing systems underground or the holding tanks as regulated in the Oregon Health Authority's 2020 Food Sanitation Rules, sections 5.3 and 5.4 respectively, provide the specific regulations for dealing with those holding tanks. In terms of licensing, the other agencies, they will have to go through Clackamas County Health, Housing, Human Services for that food handler's card, OHA's 2020 Food Sanitation Rules, and they actually have a supplement to that, which is a mobile food unit operation guide, which further defines the regulations specific to mobile units. The 2021 Oregon Plumbing Specialty Code has the information for grease interceptors that will be required. And ODEQ regulates the water tank service if any of the carts elect to have a tank and not connect. Oh, and that is specifically for potable water. That's not wastewater, the DEQ. Okay, signage. So we have a reference to the sign chapter. So that will apply wherever this is silent. Pods will be allowed 1 freestanding sign 15 feet tall with 50 square feet per face, 1 A-frame sign per frontage, maximum 2 by 3. And so that's per frontage. If it's on a corner, they could have 2. And 1 temporary banner associated with opening, 30-day maximum. And last, we have this specific buffer, this landscape buffer regulation for pods within the M1 and M2 zoning districts. We want to give a little bit more sense of safety and compatibility within the industrial park. And it's just a 2-foot buffer, landscape buffer. And this picture here, that is a 25-gallon pot. So that just kind of gives you an idea of the size that we are looking at. And this website had a lot of adorable pictures of people standing next to plants. And that's all I'll say. So this is the end, and I'm hoping for a robust discussion. And ultimately, I do hope that you recommend approval to City Council regarding TA 22-01. And I can take questions. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Oh, excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, so moving on, we will take questions from the hearing body. And I've got my little list here. And we will start with Commissioner Hutchinson.
I have some questions from the last draft. I really don't believe I have any for this one. Appreciate the tensile discussion.
Awesome.
That's really something that was concerning me, is because, there's tents and there's tents, and we want to make sure that they look nice for a period of time.
Absolutely.
And we don't want anything disposable. All of this makes sense to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. We'll wait for Commissioner Heap to come. Commissioner Calkins.
Thank you. And thank you, Brianna. Great presentation as always. Appreciate it. A couple of questions I had. I don't recall this from our last discussion. Maybe it was from a discussion in the prior year. Why for the surfaces and the hard surfaces, why was a gravel not chosen as one of the allowable surfaces?
Well, for pedestrian, it's an ADA issue, but parking, food carts, early on in work sessions, especially, we heard concerns about sort of leaking, anything coming off the food cart, even if you're, just kind of hosing off the food cart after, just getting the dirt off. You kind of want to make sure you can direct wherever that runoff is going, so it's not just seeping into the ground.
Okay.
But it will be, acceptable for, landscape areas. It's not completely verboten.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would it be allowable for like a parking section?
No,
Okay.
we don't allow gravel for parking at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
And my other question was, I had a question about the permanently affixed weather shielding options, because it made me think of the section over here where by the Dahlia building outside of Wayward, and there's like umbrellas they got the benches with the umbrellas in the hole, but if you will want that there, they can take it out, put it in another thing. Why the permanently affixed piece? I was wondering if you could elaborate on the reasoning behind that.
It did come out of the work sessions that wanted to be sort of a sense of more permanence. I think it was also kind of a liability concern. The pod owner may or may not always be there. They can perhaps be opened and shut by patrons, but I think it would just be safer overall if they were affixed to the tables themselves.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's all I have for now. No, that all makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Commissioner Ewert.
Okay. We talked about the hard surface. I'm good with that. You mentioned, and you had a question mark in there about the number of carts in the pod. So that raises several questions.
Okay.
We have an applicant comes in, hypothetically, he wants to clear a lot downtown. He wants to make spaces for 6 to 8 pods. But let's say it doesn't go well and he ends up with 1 or 2 pods in there.
Yeah.
And we end up with this albatross kind of thing downtown. What are we going to do? We're going to say if you have 8 slots, you got to have a minimum of 6. If you have 6 slots, you got to have a minimum of 4, or you have to close it down. Everybody has to leave, turn out the lights. What are we going to do to regulate this? What's that going to look like?
Sure. Well, I would say that pods are kind of self-governing. If a certain cart doesn't do well and it leaves, that spot can be filled by any other cart in the metro area that's doing well and wants to come. I haven't seen, actually, when Hillsborough first started, they did have a time getting their first pod populated. And I think that might be because of their regulations were so tight. So I'm trying to prevent that, but I also won't say that we should ever shut down a business if there's only two, if there's two successful carts in a space that, was planned for 6. We can't say what those other 4 spots may or may not be doing in the future. So I wouldn't want to cut it off.
The question mark was more to how large a pod we're going to allow, or
what the minimum should be.
Okay, what the minimum should be. So in other words, we should probably talk about whether we want a pod to be a minimum of 4 or 6 or 8 or whatever. So we need to cover that.
And I just so we don't lose track of that, I think that is something that we will be, when we get to the discussion part of things, is when we can kind of go into the meat of that question. Would be a better place for that, correct?
Sure, but
Okay.
if you're
So
asking,
what are we talking about now?
Well, I think now is just like specific questions regarding what they have up there. And the number of carts in a pod is something we've already identified that we need to hash out. And so I think that might be better in the discussion section, if that makes sense.
Okay. I don't know whether this will be allowed now or not, but if we're going to talk about that, talking about restroom size, if you have a pod that has 4, if you have a pod that has 10, going to require a different restroom capacity size.
Yeah.
We didn't really have a definition on where that was concerned.
Would you like an answer? That is based on building code, actually.
What's that?
That's based on building code.
Okay. And then the other question that I had was on, if I can ask this question on signage, 15-foot sign, where did we come up with that? And I think about town, if somebody's going, are they going to can they put up a pole sign, lollipop type sign? That's not something we've really encouraged downtown in the past.
Sure.
We've tried to do monument type signs in the industrial area. We've looked at monument type signs. I'm kind of thinking maybe that is a little bit loose as far as.
Okay. So we do have the reference back to the sign chapter, which is organized by zone. So your example of downtown, they would have to follow these dimensional requirements, but the design requirements that are outlined in this sign chapter.
Okay. All right. I guess that's all I have.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. And I do just want to double check because I'm still getting it sorted out. So when we close the public hearing, we are able to discuss the number and like hash out the number of carts and stuff during that section. That doesn't run afoul of things, correct?
That's correct. Chair Patton, I would like staff to be able to also, once you go around robin here, to provide input and some direction on some of these items as well.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Commissioner Jarosz.
Thank you, Rihanna. Once again, excellent. Appreciate it. Thank you. I understand the work that goes into that. So just a couple of very minor things that we talked about last time. We were talking about traditional carts versus non-traditional. And there are a couple of references in 164530, the standards. Number 2, the wheels and tongues must remain. And we thought, well, if it's motorized, we thought we would strike the word tongue.
Gotcha.
And then, okay, make that note. And the next one is also minor. It's on the next item in the design standards. Carts shall not have missing siding or roofing. And we thought, well, maybe there'd be a non-traditional that wouldn't have siding.
Wouldn't have siding.
Like a pizza oven or something.
Yeah.
And in that section, here's a total knit between 1, 2, and 4.
4.
Number 3 is missing.
Yep. Yeah, I did catch that. Thank you.
Sorry, I catch things like that.
I know. It's bugging me the whole time.
Thank you so much. That's it.
Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And for me, I just wanted to double check. It seems like the setbacks were something that was addressed from an earlier discussion, which takes care of that. The rules on the type of covered structures was taken care of. Thank you. Part of the reason why that had come up was we wanted to avoid like pop-up tents and things like that. And then the wastewater tanks, I didn't dig into the other like references, but I just want to make sure that that's not undergrounding of those tanks, that these tanks will need to be above ground so they can be watched, or will they still be allowed to be undergrounded?
They have to follow the Oregon Health Authorities. I did not read whether it's allowed to be underground. I do know that they are allowed to be above ground, which is what I was picturing.
Okay.
But whether it's completely excluded from being underground, I'm not sure.
Okay. Is there, okay, that answers that question. And then, okay, good on the no generators. And I think that was all I had.
Okay.
And now, were there any other questions? Okay, now we will go ahead and move into public testimony.
Chair Patton, before we move on to that, could I respond to a few of the items that were discussed?
No, sure.
Yeah, the main one I think is what we're trying to get at with the number issue on minimum numbers for food cart pods versus individualized food carts. I don't want that to be lost in the discussion. In other words, a single cart really is not a pod. So I think Brianna can help clarify this as well. Versus two or more was the idea behind that. I would hate to see us prevent incubator places where you had two and we said something like you have to have at least four to begin with. I don't think that's going to encourage food carts in the city. And I think part of that is if you were to set up, say, for example, a food cart up to 6 pods, that may take time for that to occur. And so I think there's a market-driven component to this. As long as they meet all the other standards, I don't think it should bother us that it takes them some time to bring in the food cart pods on the individual site.
So if that's the question, should we have the discussion about the number of pods now or later?
Brianna, your thoughts?
Well,
I'm happy to do whatever. I just made a commitment to try and keep us on track for these things. And so if I need a little, you just let me know. Nothing like at the Oscars last night, please. So
I think maybe a suggestion would be we continue, get the public testimony, and then we'll circle back on this.
Okay.
But I think we'd like to have an engagement with you on the number and specific.
I've got it written down here as to not lose it, Don. Don't worry. I know I agree with Commissioner Ewert. We need to get that sorted out.
Okay.
But I figured that the better place for that was in the discussion section.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So with that, we'll go ahead into the public hearing, which I doubt is going to take very long. So we're going to get into that sooner than later. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and start our public hearing for testimony. Are there any proponents that would like to speak on food carts? Any? None. Okay. Are there any opponents that would like to speak about what we're doing here tonight? None? I don't see a rush of people. Okay. So with that, we're going to go ahead and close the public hearing and we're going to open it up for questions from the hearing body. So now I think we can go into the numbers, correct? Do you want to come back up or how do you want to do it?
So just repeating kind of what I'm saying, and I'll turn it back over to Brianna, but essentially I think I just want to just recast this, that the intention here is these are generally not going to be large consuming spaces to begin with. But just in terms of them being incubator, I think it'd be best for us to have, if somebody comes in with an idea behind how many their food carts are going to have over time, that's up to them to figure out when those spaces get filled, as long as they meet the other requirements. And I think Brianna was simply trying to define that if you have 2 or more, which I think is probably where it needs to be, if you have a food cart pod, you probably need 2. You're probably not a food cart pod if you have 1. Yeah. You're probably an individual unit, and Brianna can provide more commentary on this. She's the expert on this. But my main concern is I don't want to get to a point where we're saying you have to have a minimum of, let's say, 4, and somebody comes in and said, I've got 2 to 3, and like they can't come into the city.
Sure.
That doesn't make sense to me.
No.
Yes, Commissioner Hutchinson.
So what's the difference between a pod of 2 and a very large area that maybe has an individual cart at either end of the parking lot? I mean, and one of the reasons why I bring this up is because I'm not sure that 2 carts define a necessity for a bathroom any more than 1 does, but there's definitely a threshold in there somewhere. And then again, it's like, is there a proximity standard for individual carts before we start saying, okay, you guys are parking too close together, you got to put in a bathroom, and things of that nature. It just seems like there's a little vagueness in there.
The individual, the temporary mobile food vendors that procure the temporary permit, those are only allowed 1 per site. So we're never going to have 1 temporary food cart or more than 1 temporary food cart per parcel. But I do think your comment about the bathrooms for 2 carts, that does seem like overkill. And I would caution sort of, these regulations that we're drafting, this will create a pretty permanent pod. They're not forever, but it could be there 10, 15, 20 years. So, these regulations are not small. So if someone's going to come in and, put the time, money, and effort into it, we want to make sure that everything we're requiring is actually, a minimum standard for sort of our regulations. We don't want to go over the top with that.
So Brianna, just suggestions, maybe this is a discussion on the number of restrooms. I mean, I think that's a great question about, and maybe there's some alteration to that is necessary. My main point is I just don't want to discourage, somebody coming in with, even if there were 2, and so the restroom becomes a question as to whether or not we're requiring everything on that.
Yeah, what pops into mind with me is I'm thinking of an empty lot that's near the high school. And the high school admitted long ago that it doesn't have the capacity to feed all the kids with the schedule that they've chosen. And so they open campus on purpose. And if you've tried to get lunch around the high school at lunchtime, you know what I'm talking about, right? It seems like a perfect place for it, but I'm not sure that it's like maybe a 7,000 square foot lot or something like that, maybe a little bigger. And, it seems like it'd be a great place to put a couple of carts in, but that's, again, it's a big threshold. And then there's also the issue with profitability, because if we end up with making the infrastructure requirements so high that it's actually cheaper to go brick and mortar, then we're not promoting much. And I've been to food cart pods where it's just straight up Cisco out of the factory food at exorbitant prices. And I didn't really see the benefit.
Okay. Commissioner Ewert, did you want to elaborate on where you were going?
So this is the way I see this, and I agree with what you just said about having the infrastructure, having it be too inexpensive of a thing, but yet on the other hand, we don't want a situation where we have porta potties stacked up out there enough to handle this. Where we have, if we have, like you say, if you had it by let's say the high school, and you had a football game, if I had a food cart, I'd want to be open during a football game, basketball game, whatever. You're going to have a high volume of use for that pod. Now, I just went through Lincoln. Was it Lincoln City? It was Lincoln City. And they've got a nice food pod there. People have come in, they've built a permanent roofed walled structure that has tables on the inside, bathrooms across the back. And the food pods, I think there was room for 6 or 8 there that are backed into the building. They were not full. They did not have all the spaces filled, but they had room for about that many. they were pretty full as far as people using the food carts, pods, whatever. And there was also lines outside the bathrooms there too. So I when I was going through this and reading that, and I saw that, I thought, what do we want this to, look like? So I think it's a question that's worth it. Now, does the state have standards for if you're going to be a person that serves food? If I know with the restaurant, you have to have restrooms. Okay. Is there a standard from the state that the state standard is going to qualify that we have to have certain number of restrooms available?
Yeah.
So do we incorporate that into part of ours, or do we just fall on the state's rules and regulations? I don't know, but I just see this as being somebody's going to come to you guys. They're going to say, we want to put in an application. We want to do a food pod. We want to put 8 carts in this thing. And what are our bathroom needs? What's the answer going to be?
So the number of stalls is based on building code per square footage of the site. But then the question kind of becomes, it has to intersect with our regulations of how many carts are in a pod and the sort of logistical issues that we're discussing about that. So, the ratio of restroom stalls to square footage will always be there. It will translate to scale, but kind of the minimum number of carts that constitute starting to require the bathrooms is kind of where we're running up against right now.
Okay, so then I guess I'll hit the ball back to your court.
Yeah.
What do you guys think you would like to see that would fit for our purposes that we're trying to do here? Are we thinking 4? Are we thinking 6? Are we thinking 8 with 20? I don't know.
3.
3?
That's
3.
And I was thinking 3 or 4. I mean, that's to my mind, but Brianna, please.
My first thought was 4 because it's an even number. 3 also. 3 is enough to, kind of create a sort of sense of place, right? If we're trying to create, if it's a small site with 7,000 square feet, they could still make that a nice sense of space with however, 2 or 3 carts they could get in there. So maybe 3 is a good number.
Okay, then I'll throw this out as a business guy. I'm going to think, okay, I'm going to develop this. He's going to want to make money by renting his spots to his food cart people. I'm going to put down the asphalt. I'm going to put down all the utilities. I'm going to put in all this cost to do this. I'm sure as heck not going to do it for 3.
For 3. Well, that's the market question. And it's also kind of a function of the site size. Because if you have a site size that can only fit 3, I'm going to do 3 or I'm going to do nothing. If I have a site that can fit 10, I'm not going to do 3. I'm going to do however many I can fit.
Sure.
So.
But then if we do that, if we go 10, then what are we looking at as far as our codes are concerned, as far as what they're going to have to put in for infrastructure?
But then we're getting to a larger scale and I'm less concerned about the upfront cost for the developer. Because if they're looking to put in a large pod, they are expecting an upfront cost, right? If we have a sort of, I know kind of the mom and pop is kind of a pejorative term, but if we have, a local person who wants to set up a small pod, it's still difficult, but maybe they can do it within, their personal budget, their small business budget. If we have a developer who loves putting pods in, he'll front the money for the larger development. So I can kind of see 2 models of pod.
Okay, so you're suggesting that we call a pod 3 or more.
Well, I'm curious. I'd like to give folks at this end here an opportunity to weigh in as well.
Let's see. I guess one thing I think we talked about last time, maybe I heard it elsewhere, is that these might be people that are holding on to a piece of land that will take them 20 years to develop for some reason. So there's an incentive to them to make some money on that land and hopefully, not charge such a large fee to the pod other cart owners. So because it's an incentive just to make something rather than nothing. That's only thought.
Yeah, my gut when the question first came up earlier in the meeting was 3. My gut is rarely wrong. No, but I was thinking 3 is as well. I do want to give a lot of credence to what Mr. Hardy was saying as far as the market forces. We have to keep in mind, I believe, that this is something new for Canby. It's not new, like many things, the splash pad and a lot of other things. Canby seems to be the last to kind of do this, but the benefit to that is that we get to learn from the mistakes and take all the best practices and make it a great thing for Canby. But it might be a situation where somebody wants to make 3, 4, 5, and it's going to take some time to get to 3. And maybe there's 1, and then there's 2, and there's 3. Is there a thought to a time frame where it's like, okay, well, you're set up for 4, but right now you only have 1. That's okay for a period of time, and then if you're not 3 and it's just 1 hanging out, and some time goes by, it's like, then what happens? I guess was my only real kind of question. I think is that,
and I would just perhaps, and we're not the food cart proprietors, but I would say that market scenario would not be favorable for that person, and they probably would not have a sustainable business model because we're asking them to do a lot of upfront work, the restrooms, the site improvements. I think that would not be, I think the market would determine that success or not. I think that's a market driven issue personally. I think I think, they'll either be successful or they won't. And back to Commissioner Giroix's comment, I think there's probably many underutilized areas in the city as well. Perhaps 99E, you're dealing with that corridor, and are there parts of parking lots that are not being used that could be used that are perhaps oversized, for example? There might be parts downtown as well. Additional thoughts. So it may or may not be that they're repaving the site, for example. But I do think that, I guess to the extent that, Brianna's researched out like a ton of these, and I don't think any other jurisdictions put caveats on, you've got to have this number by this time frame to, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Brianna.
No, not by a time frame. I think that would be pretty hard to regulate, honestly. I will say that we do have Jamie Stickle, who is lovely at outreach. And if we do kind of see a lull in a certain pod, it might be just an outreach and sort of marketing issue more than anything else, because the market for these things in general is robust. So, we do have city staff that can, facilitate outreach and help with things like that.
No, thank you. I'm not interested in doing that. I was just curious if that was something you had thought about. But yeah, I'm good with 3. I guess that's it.
Okay. And listening to what folks have set up here, these are some of the thoughts that have kind of rolled through my mind. We're talking about doing a number on a piece of property. So it sounds like we're kind of hashing out 3 carts signify a pod. And then to Commissioner Ewert's point about restroom facilities, it seems to me like maybe there should be some way we can do this as both a number and a percentage. So it's like if let's say landowner X has a 2-acre piece of land and they want to build a food cart pod on it, and we're going to say, okay, it has to be 3 carts. Rather than going hog wild and doing all 2 acres, we recommend that you do the first acre, which you can have 8 pods on, and that would require X amount of bathroom facilities. And then when you go so now you're taking up 50% of your property is these. And then when you bump up to 100%, this is the threshold for a different level of facilities. And to kind of take some of the ambiguity out of how that looks. Does that kind of make sense, or am I off on the wrong track?
This is kind of, planners have this discussion kind of in different forms all the time. It's like, how much of the site is going to be used for each thing. It kind of naturally works itself out because we're requiring, X percentage of landscaping, X percentage of parking, X percentage of amenity space. A food cart space is typically, it's about 200 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
So you can take that and then you kind of add 300 square feet of amenity space to it. So you're thinking 500 square feet per cart, specific to a pod, because we're kind of incorporating that amenity space. So, if you want a rough number, you could use that 500, but we've kind of found that whether you do it on a ratio or whether you do it on all of our requirements combined, they do kind of even out, just because, you might want to smush as many carts as you can on there, but there are other requirements preventing you from having just a sea of carts. You have to have all of our other elements as well. But, a ratio, the 500 square foot number, if you wanted to start with that, it is a good sort of guideline, especially for new concepts. So I don't discount that, but they do kind of even out in the end, I would say, just from personal experience, seeing these things developed.
So with all of these, with what is in this, what is the minimum amount of land that someone would need to do to put up a 3-cart pod?
So you would need 1,500 square feet, and then 20% landscaping is on the high side. It's somewhere between 5 and 20, depending on the zone. Maybe 4 or 5
I'm horrible
thousand.
at math. And these timer things are not going to help me.
Depends on shape, depends on the parking zone, parking district. So I would say probably a minimum. I think the 7,000 square foot example is probably a minimum. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if someone creative could make it work, great, but.
Because what I'd hate to do is say we're going to make like 3 carts the minimum, but then someone has a piece of property that they could fit 2 on.
Yeah.
But that takes them out of the running. You know what I'm saying? So, okay.
But then what they could do is get the temporary permit, which allows them to be there up to a year before we kind of revisit their permit. And with the sort of revamped temp food permit that we are creating, they would still need a business license. The only difference is their utility requirements are a little less strenuous.
Okay.
But there still could be a cart there kind of in perpetuity as long as it is a good neighbor.
Okay. What other thoughts do we have up here?
The tongue question popped up again. And I noticed when I was looking at the language that we didn't specifically differentiate between something with a motor and something without. And since our last meeting, I actually started looking at all the places where I eat downtown and noticing that actually the majority of them do not have motors. And that actually gives a more square foot inside to turn into kitchen. And I was kind of thinking about what that means as far as the things being ambulatory. And I was thinking I could go down to U-Haul and get a pickup to move a trailer, in about half an hour. But if that motor hasn't turned over in a year and a half, it may take an afternoon's worth of mechanical work to get the thing up and possible to move again. And so I'm not 100% sure that whether something has a motor or not is easier or harder to relocate if we find that there's issues with a specific cart or not. And I was wondering if anyone else are we fixed on the idea that these are motorized vehicles only, or are we leaving it open to use trailers?
We do have in the definition here a vehicle or trailer. I think it is a good point, sort of, if it's not able to run, but it has a motor, that's kind of a quality issue. So perhaps we could say a running vehicle or trailer or some, sort of wordsmith that so the vehicle is in working order, or a trailer. Kind of
to fit in with the inflated tires clause somehow.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm worried that I think that refitting a vehicle to be a kitchen is a much more expensive operation than a trailer. I'm thinking of the Lions trailer that my father-in-law does at all the events down in Corvallis for as a fundraiser for the Lions Club. And that's just a trailer. And then they find someone with a truck to move it whenever it needs to go. And I don't know. I mean, I think it's a very strong stance to make one way or the other, and we should think carefully about it.
Go ahead.
So you're thinking we should think carefully about whether we allow both or just no motorized and trailers?
I think the original language when we talked about it in council was everything that sold food had to be able to drive away under its own power, and that the tires had to be inflated so that they could do such a thing. And that's kind of where I came away from it. But then after I was doing my own research, I started realizing, that the majority percentage of these devices are actually trailers. And I'm not sure. I mean, when I think about the things that drip off of a moving motor vehicle as opposed to what drips off of the bottom of a kitchen trailer, a lot more toxic things come off of the bottom of a vehicle. So I'm not really sure that that's a good point for definition. But I just want to make sure that we're being clear about what our decisions are, and I think that if we choose one way or the other, we can revisit it in a period of time if we decide that it's not working or that we're cutting off opportunity from potential business owners.
I guess if I had an either or, I would limit it to just trailers, just because when you look at these different places where they have these, it's the vehicle ones that are the ones that get a little bit off the charts as far as size and everything else. The trailers kind of are more symmetrical and fit in. You can hook onto them, take them away if they needed to be taken away. If there's a fire, I would imagine you could tow it out of there, out of the cluster quicker than you could if you have a vehicle that doesn't run. I wouldn't have a problem with not necessarily allowing motorized type vehicles. It keeps you away from the school buses and old motorhomes and that type of thing, and keeps things more in the trailer type, pulling thing, in my opinion.
And this would be specific for pods then?
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
Yes. I think as far as the food carts that drive around in our industrial park and whatnot, I don't have a problem with that. Okay. But for our pods, the one that I saw, for example, in Lincoln City just this last weekend, were all trailers. There was no motorized vehicles in there at all. So I think that would be I wouldn't mind seeing that limitation put in it.
Okay.
For staff, are you aware of other cities that have a provision like that where it's like just trailers or just motorized or anything like that? Do you recall?
I didn't see, no, none of the other codes specified, but I will say sort of in practice, Happy Valley has a similar setup to Lincoln City, and I believe those are all trailers as well. And it just might be sort of the market and the clientele. But no, not specifically in code have I seen that.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing this up, Commissioner Hutchinson. I think, because I definitely want to make sure that trailers are part of it, and maybe there's some wordsmithing there. I didn't take that from the wording, but I do remember the discussion. I think especially as going back to the kind of the market side of the discussion, I would be hesitant to codify having just trailers or just vice versa. I would be interested in allowing them both. I think we have language that says they must be in good shape, in good condition. Maybe we can beef that up for motorized, possibly, but I would be hesitant to make it one way, because I've had great meals from both. And, if there's a motorized one, hopefully it should be working and running, and maybe we can look at it that way. And if it's leaking garbage underneath, then that could be, a violation of, the other, agencies that look at food handling and things like that. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, sorry I'm late tonight, everybody, but pretty busy lately. But yeah, as far as the trailers versus motorized RVs, I see a problem with restricting it to one or the other. One food cart that comes to mind right now is like the Popeyes Chicken in Wilsonville by Ace Hardware. And it's totally classy looking. It looks, it looks nice. It doesn't look all run down. And, obviously they're not in a pod. They're just standalone right now. But if Popeye's Chicken wanted to rent a spot, I don't see why we would want to restrict that.
So I guess in hearing that round of stuff, so we've got language in here saying that like the tires need to be blown up and all that stuff, right? Would it be a step too far to put language in that says that there has to be a motor test periodically? Like they actually have to have somebody go out on a monthly basis and say, start this food cart up. And if you you roll it over and it doesn't start, you get a little slip that says you've got, X amount of time to get this fixed. And we're going to come back and we're going to test it. And if not, then we got some problems going on. I mean, does that seem unreasonable? I don't think it does. Judy? Commissioner DeRoche?
It's okay. I think I'm not so worried about that. I'm thinking these might be those type of food carts, not the kind that you see at a warehouse that, you know what I mean, that has the flip up sides. I'm talking about like Chick-fil-A or one of the non-traditional, or the ones you see down at the truck stop now. They're like Indian food and things, and they're also self-propelled and they look pretty nice. And I'm wondering, just because they're in a pod, maybe during the week, maybe they'd be doing other events on the weekend. So that's another reason. Sometimes I think those food carts, they're a little more mobile than somebody that needs a truck to pull a trailer. That's my sense. When you see them around, you often see, mostly when they're one-offs, they're the food cart type. And then as someone who has had 2 warning letters from AAA for overusing towing services, everybody can get towed if they need to.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I feel like on that point, I feel like also in my research, not extensive as yours probably, but in my research, it feels like the motorized ones, like they'll be at this one Tuesday and Wednesdays, and then they'll move over here. And then on the weekend, they're doing, the big city event somewhere and stuff like that. So maybe they wouldn't be sitting forever.
I don't know. I think the investment as well, and I've had good experiences at wedding receptions where there was a motorized pizza place that was pretty awesome. So whether they stay permanently or not, the challenge is going to be, how do we enforce conditions on something? And again, it comes back to some of the market elements, which is, if it's in disrepair, would that mean that, perhaps there are other elements of their operation that also may not be as appealing to consumers? So I think these are pretty expensive things to operate. I don't think people are going to not maintain their facilities that are they would purchase. So I kind of like the idea of having the option of both, because we just don't know what that market is.
Okay.
I agree. I've hired, we do auctions, we hire food cart guys, and they come out and they take care of us. So we may have 2, 3, 4 of them on site for the auction. So I don't have a problem with that. And, they usually pull out of some place where they're normally doing business. I don't have a problem with that, but I guess my whole thing with this thing is I want it to look nice. I want it to enhance the livability of Canby. I do not want it looking like some of these in Hubbard and Woodburn that look, you're not really sure if it's a junkyard or if it's a food pod. Okay. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, it's true. I do not want that to happen in Canby. So when I ask questions about the bathrooms and so on and so forth, where are we going to, what are we going to do with this whole thing? Has anybody ever thought about maybe doing kind of an HOA type of a thing, for the pod itself? If you have 4, 6, 8 in there, who cleans the tables? How does that, we mentioned the words last time we talked about this, it was, they will self-regulate. That's a little bit loose.
So every individual cart owner will have to sign a lease with the pod owner. And the regulations will be in that lease. So, every cart is going to be responsible for at least cleaning up their own space. I would assume that it would be a sort of more communal, but similar to HOAs, we don't regulate HOAs. We kind of encourage and want them to be there at the inception of the subdivision. But, as it goes on, we don't regulate those. We want the pod owners or the homeowners to do that for themselves. So,
right.
Yeah, it would be a similar tool.
I think that when we talk about whether or not the unit fires up and can move, to be really honest, I think it's probably, you guys don't have time to do it. The code enforcement officer doesn't have time to do it. I think that whoever owns that pod needs to make sure that those things are mobile and that they can move. I would think the fire department would want to make sure that if they had to, those things all have propane tanks on them. If fire did break out in that thing, I would think that they would want to disperse those things and get them out of the way.
Yeah.
It would just be my opinion. So I would think that maybe the person who owns the pod should have a major responsibility to make sure that this thing looks nice, the units run, they're mobile, and he meets the code.
We do require the business license for the pod owner in addition to the individual carts. And we do a yearly review on that, and that does include police and fire do the yearly review as well. So that is one level where we will continually be checking on that.
Just keyed this up in my head. I know that the individual kitchens are covered by health code. What about the common eating area?
Yeah,
Does that work with, who sanitizes it? Is it something that we can just leave responsibility that the pod
it
owners?
is covered. Yeah, it is covered. In the attachments says, and I referenced them.
Thank you.
Okay. Green light here. Okay. So, did we come to a consensus regarding, I think it sounds like the number will be 3.
3
is a minimum.
Wonderful.
And I think that's the most, and that we are going to allow both motorized and non-motorized trailers and vehicles. We want to make sure that's in there. Does that sound right?
And bathrooms, number of stalls scale with the square feet of restaurant space, correct?
That is in the building code.
But it's there. So
Yes.
they will scale
absolutely.
as these get larger.
Absolutely.
Okay. Was there any other lingering questions?
And then we have the, I feel like there was.
I have
Covered the signs, regulated by the zone.
Real quick, like the table umbrellas, they're allowed as long as they're attached to the table, right? As long as there's something securing them, okay?
Yeah.
No generators, okay.
Parking.
I think that was the brunt of it.
Okay.
Are we like to that point? Go ahead.
Yeah, just one more question. We touched on this before. So these are going to be in the pod. We'll have hookups like if you pulled into a RV camp and hooked up your RV. So they're going to have sewer, they're going to have water, they're going to have electrical. And those all fit in our building code standards. And then we talked about the grease trap. Now I know that you mentioned it in this. Can you cover that again for me, just so I'm clear? Are there going to be tanks underneath here to hold the grease? Because when we talked about this before, you mentioned that there was going to be a tank that everybody could dump their grease into.
Yep.
Or there would be tanks underneath the trailers. I wasn't quite clear on how that washed out, how that ended up.
Should we pull up the plumbing code?
I don't see I don't see this as being something in the plumbing code.
It's referenced in the plumbing code.
I didn't find it when I looked at it, but
Yeah, let me.
I know that these do generate a fair amount of grease, and some, depending on what they're cooking, but
One thing that's important is to differentiate the trap from the water sewage, and
Right.
then the grease that I think they can actually sell it to make diesel out of it anymore. But
I think that actually has to be pumped by a state
yeah,
pumper now. You can't just sell it
yeah,
on the street.
but someone will come and get it.
Right, right.
But yeah, I think even if you're selling coffee, you have to have a grease trap
We talked,
above the sewer.
right.
And I think that's in there.
And we talked about last time that there was going to be either a tank where everybody that's on site, that everybody dumps their grease into, then it's pumped out by a state licensed person. Or we also talked about in what she read here tonight, that there were tanks under the units. So I was just kind of curious as to, is the person who's building the food pod going to also have to, just like you would do with dumpsters and garbage things, put a tank there for holding grease?
The link on the attachment's not working.
It did not load. I'm
Yeah.
sorry about that.
The,
I didn't try it earlier.
would it be, is it actually, are we talking about two, so there's two, to me, it sounds like there's two different things. There's
There's
the,
two ways that it can be handled.
correct. So you've got the deep fat fryer, and then they need to change that grease out. So they dump it into like a tank.
Grease can come from a
Well,
grill.
yeah, yes,
It
but
can come
then,
from a deep fat fire, it can come from a lot of things, but
And
you
then-
can't dump it in the sewer.
correct. And then there's like the sink where they're washing dishes and stuff where there's residual grease or whatever. And then that goes into the grease trap.
Ooh.
Well, the grease trap is regulated on its own.
Yeah.
And I think that there are just storage requirements for grease because it's flammable. And I think that's probably also managed in the health code, or because it's a ferment problem as well.
A restaurant is going, yes, a restaurant has grease trap, it has to be pumped. They take care of that. What we're creating here with these food pods is we're creating that needs to be disposed of somehow. And I'm just in a restaurant, it would go to a grease trap, it would go through the whole process in the plumbing code.
Why is this
There
happening?
is a process for that.
Yeah.
When you have a restaurant in a trailer, you don't have the same thing. You're producing that grease and it's going to go in a 5-gallon bucket. It's going to go in a 20-gallon tank. Somebody's going to take it out and dump it in a 500-gallon tank that's in an enclosed. And we didn't talk about any of that. If that's how we want them to handle that, then whoever's building this food pod needs to have a place where they have the garbage cans, okay? And they need to have a place where this grease is going to be retained and removed. And again, it goes to the livability of this, is to the smell and the odor and how that is all taken care of.
Yeah, but I think So yes, I see where you're going, and grease traps are something because the sewer folks talk about it a lot. I think in this is saying like if the landowner is developing a food cart pod and all of the food cart pods sinks are dumping into the wastewater system, there has to be a grease trap in there to capture that grease, just like a restaurant. And that's where the codes would come in. Now, the other thing is if there's a tank that's elsewhere on the property where that grease is going, that's not going into our wastewater treatment system. That's getting pumped out. That is a completely different, that falls under a different jurisdiction as far as what happens to that greasy water once it's carried away.
Correct.
So
I did not hear that mentioned in
this. It's perfectly legal to put used cooking oil in a tight container and throw it in the trash.
yes.
Yeah, for a licensed restaurant, I'm not sure that.
Well,
I don't know.
Hold on a
it
second.
depends on the quantity.
Have we talked about this? Do we have a process for this are we addressing it?
It's been a while, but whenever we first started discussing the food pod idea, we did talk about like if this grease storage area and trash would be, the view would be obstructed by some sort of decorative, like bricks or whatever it would be, just so that it's aesthetically pleasing. But yeah, it's been a couple months since we discussed that. I obviously very late tonight, and so I'm not sure if you guys ever got around to talking about like the trash storage and grease tanks tonight. But
Well, I would imagine we have trash storage in our building code, so that is, we're covered there. We're talking about a unique type of a cooking situation here that we're allowing in our city. And so, Mike, I'm just asking the question.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't want a bunch of 5-gallon buckets of grease sitting around outside of the trailers, hoping and praying that somebody remembers to take them home at night. Okay, I'm just throwing that out there. I want to make sure that we spell it out very clearly to whoever owns this food pod that we don't want grease. We want it taken care of. Food waste taken care of. So.
And I do believe I covered that with the references. I don't know why the link wasn't working. I will obviously renew that link, but I do believe it was covered in the other licensing.
Where was the link supposed to take you to?
The 2021 Oregon Specialty Code, Chapter 10, is grease interceptors.
It's about the third one up from the bottom.
Oregon 2021, what?
Oregon's Specialty Plumbing Code or Plumbing Specialty Code.
These
Code, what chapter?
10.
10, okay.
Traps and interceptors.
Specialty code.
And interceptors are used for restaurants. I know that for sure, but I'm not too sure what the requirement is on a food.
Well, we saw designs where they were sharing a grease trap, and we saw designs where each trailer had an individual grease trap. And either way is good as long as there is one, I think, is the conclusion that came out of it. And I think the onus is on the pod owner to maintain the communal one. And I think, and I'm not sure that we defined it as that. I think we defined that, but I don't think we made a definition for who's responsible for individual ones. I think that it's only an issue if they're sharing.
Do you have it over there, Judy?
No.
Or Commissioner Giroux?
No.
It keeps wanting me to buy
In
something.
my reading of it, I did not see anything as far as this type of in the plumbing code is concerned. So,
Are you talking food cart pod versus restaurant?
yes.
Okay.
It was very clear in the restaurants, but I didn't see it for the food pod situation.
So if we include a reference that following that piece of building code is applicable to food cart pods in our code,
I think we'd be covered if we did that. If we put it in our building code that food pod, the food trailers would need to have their own grease trap situation, then, whatever that looks like. I don't, there's gallonage, there's a whole bunch of equations that go into that. But I think we would be remiss if we didn't put that in there somehow.
Yep, got it.
So would that essentially be like saying they need to follow the same plumbing standards as a restaurant for the code?
Specific to the grease.
Grease traps?
Yeah.
Okay,
Well,
I like that.
Which may or may not be the case anyway.
Well, that's what's going to be my question is if that's not the case and there is, I feel like the carts and the trucks are so common and the pods are so common. There's got to be a system that, handles it. And you said earlier that you had discussed it last year. And so I also feel like you researched it and the link's not working right now to kind of answer the concerns. But I feel like you wouldn't have put that there if you hadn't found it. So I trust that there must be a way already that they have to follow. I don't want to over-regulate them and make them have to do a bunch of fancy stuff to be like a restaurant if there's already a way that trucks do this that's accepted in the state. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah, but I agree. One of the things that I hear the folks at the wastewater treatment plant talk about is grease traps and how that impacts our sewer. So I agree that if there is something we need to do is like carve out or make this a little more specific so that this is handled, I am for it.
Well, but then is someone gonna invest all this money if it is not something that nobody other city does? Is someone going to invest all that money to do that and so they can come to Canby?
I mean, I don't believe that putting in and maintaining a grease trap is a humongous expense.
I think we should just clearly define whose responsibility it is to make sure there is one. So if there's a communal one, it belongs to the pod owner, and if or there has to be a definition whether there's a communal one or not. And if there's not a communal one, then it's the responsibility of the individual card owner. And just make sure that we've covered both sides.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just say, be legal.
Right.
And someone take responsibility.
And
does that make sense?
Just to add a little bit more to that conversation, I believe Clackamas County Health Department would never sign off on a restaurant that didn't, food cart or restaurant that did not have appropriate grease trap facilities. I mean, they do a lot of inspections for these things. You have to comply with their health standards. And so I'm sure they're going to be involved with that. So they're the authorized regulatory agency in my belief in the situation.
And I didn't mean having a grease trap, but making it like I don't know what the conditions are for a restaurant versus there might be restaurant has to be like this, food cart pod has to be like this. So I wasn't trying to say like not to have them at all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So have we hammered that one out? Commissioner Ewert, does that?
All I am saying is that I want this to look nice. I want it to enhance the livability of Canby. And I am sure that whether it's Lincoln City, Happy Valley, Hillsborough, Beaverton, wherever, they've dealt with this. I think that we should have something in our ordinance that says, or not, if the state handles it, if the county handles it, fine, that's great. I just haven't seen it addressed in what we have here. And to just go loosey-goosey and just say, I'm sure they'll take care of it. Well, I'm sure they probably won't if there's a cost to it and they can get away with not doing it. So we just need to have our T's crossed and our I's dotted if we're going to allow this type of a thing. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying we need to price them out of the ballpark or anything else. I'm just saying if it's going to be in Canby, I want it to be top cabin.
Sure.
So, and grease disposal is important.
Yeah.
for not only our city sewer system, but for the whole thing that we're trying to say yes to here. So that's all I'm saying. I'll be quiet.
No, I mean, no, that's not what this is about. I want to make sure that we get this right.
I agree.
One of the things we need to remember, I think, about things, smells and sights, citizens of Canby are not shy about sharing their opinion when they're unhappy with something. And I'm quite sure our code enforcement will hear about it as soon as there is something perceived to be, not up to par. And I feel pretty comfortable about that. Now the grease traps, of course, that's a utility problem. And I think that we've covered up hiding up the ugly infrastructure and what Brianna's put together. And I just want to remind everyone that it's like, the toughest person to please is just Joe Schmo walking down the street. As far as what we're doing, we're just kind of covering the legality part.
And is there any way for us to regulate to say, restaurant X or food cart pod X, you have a stinky grease barrel? Do we do that? Is that a thing?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
So that is covered under that as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think we're covered in that. Okay. What else?
I want lobster.
He wants lobster. Lobster rolls. I go for a lobster roll. It's been a long time since I've had a lobster roll. Oh, they're so good in back east. Okay. So with that, is there any other questions, concerns? One thing I would just like to throw out, I think something, and I don't know if this is already on your bubble, but I think we should have as soon as the first one of these comes down the pipe, we need to have a pretty thorough evaluation of how this works, the process works, and then come back to us maybe and say, this is how it worked. These are some areas that need to be cleaned up, that sort of thing. So we can kind of get some feedback on that initial one. And then maybe a follow-up a year after to really see how everything that we've done to drag this across the finish line has actually come to fruition. Does that make sense? Because to me, it seems like groups like this throw a lot of stuff into a deep, dark hole, and we never actually hear how it's doing down there. And I, for one, would like to know how it's doing after this is all done, if that makes sense. Okay. Mm-hmm. So with that, I think, so I just want to double check. So in this, there is no, do we have when we move into actually doing this, is there the motion?
You would make a recommendation because this is a type 4. But what I'm actually going to suggest is that we continue to a date certain because these are very, I can address these rather quickly. So if we want to continue it to the next meeting or the meeting after, depending on our schedule, it's actually okay for the next few weeks. I can make these changes and that way we won't have to renotice it.
Perfect.
Yes. So you can see the smaller changes that we're making here, and then you can recommend approval at that point.
Okay. I like the way we're going with that because we do have some, just one more. I think one more will do it. Go ahead.
Rather than have one more, could we just make the recommendation with the changes that we talked about and know that you will make the changes that we talked about, and then it can just go to council? We don't have to keep.
I would recommend, not to counter Brianna, but I would recommend the council, Brianna has a secondary thought to give council those items. That's another option to say, this is what we heard and this is how we've addressed those items. Then council, I mean, I think there's some urgency here. I think the folks behind us are part of that. And so there's some people that want to do this. And I just feel like we kind of owe it to people to get this going. Yeah.
So we would present this as is and then discuss the things that you want changed.
We'll see, but then you wouldn't be discussing it with us.
We wouldn't be discussing it with you. We would we would be bringing it to city council.
It's type 4 though, so they have to vote on it anyway. And they could change they can make more changes.
That's what I mean. They can make,
they can always make the changes to what we say.
I want to make sure we send a nice polished version of this to council.
And we could do this on you're thinking the 11th, is that April 11th?
I understand the urgency of some of the councilors wanting to bring this across a thing, but I guess I would like to do a temperature test up here then of, this is not an official vote, but of the people on the dais, who would prefer to see the changes made and then come back to us for one last review?
Yeah.
I would like to see it come back for one last review. How about everybody else?
I think with as long as we've been working on this and as long as it's been in the works, to extend it 2 more weeks would be reasonable, just to make sure that we have it all ironed out.
Okay. Commissioner Hutchinson?
I have confidence the staff to put something reflective of our views before council.
Okay.
Yeah,
we know you're good. Send it out.
I agree. I think the changes were so minor, really.
Oh, man. This is why we need to get that other position hired. We'll see. Now it's a tie. So
got some decisions to make.
I don't know. So what are the changes that we are proposing this one?
We have the minimum of 3 carts.
Yep.
Sorry, I have a lot of pages here. We are changing the wording on the tongue, siding, and roofing. We want to make sure that motors are not in disrepair, so I'm going to wordsmith that definition. We are allowing both of them. Parking was good, signs were good, and then
the plumbing stuff.
The grease trap stuff.
Oof, that is a big one for me.
There's a lot of other people on the grease trap thing.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to fix that one. We're kind of proxying for other people who already have made regulations.
Which would include public works. I mean, they're engaged in this. They're not going to let a bunch of stuff go down the drain. I'm just letting you know.
I'm feeling a lot of pressure here. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
We will also have a condition of approval.
I did.
Oh, go ahead.
Of course, James is found, or Commissioner Hebe has found it.
The plumbing code, whatnot, and it says waste pre-treatment is required in all food service establishments. So I'm assuming that would include the food cards. So.
Okay.
I don't know.
Well, I am going to cave, and I think it's fine if considering those are the changes. It seems like we've got at least the grease trap part figured out. I'm comfortable with moving forward to council on this one.
And just as a suggestion, since we're going to council, I mean, we could give a summation. Brianna, I'm just, back to PC, and if with that, you guys going forward to how we're addressing it, we'll obviously keep you guys in the loop on this. But I mean, I do think we've received calls. We've had people come into the office. I mean, there's definitely some pent up demand on this. Yeah.
Well, if we send this on to council and I don't see cars coming up within the next 3 months, I want it back.
I'll take you to lunch.
And a food cart.
Yeah.
Okay. So with that, we've done our questions. We've kind of done our discussion as well. I feel we are ready for a vote. Okay. What are we voting on?
You would vote to recommend.
But is there some verbiage we need to read that's specific?
We call for a motion first, or is it, do you do that on?
If it's not on,
Well, we'll call for a motion and we don't have anything specific that we say. I just call
no,
for
it's
the
just a
motion.
recommendation to council. Yeah.
Okay.
I guess I can put up the last slide if that would be helpful.
Call for a motion, and then with the recommended changes.
To make a recommendation of approval.
Okay. So who wants to make the motion? I'm calling for it.
I'll make the motion.
Okay.
I move to request the planning commission make a recommendation of approval to city council regarding TA 22-01 food cart pod text amendment with changes discussed in the meeting today.
I second.
Seconded. Okay. It's been moved and seconded to move the recommendation forward. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Are there any oppositions? Is there any abstentions? It is unanimous. The motion carries. We are sending it off to city council with the changes that we are
Wonderful.
recommending. Okay. So with that, we are now done with our public hearing. So we'll move on to items of interest and report from planning staff.
Chair Patton, just a few updates for the April 11th Planning Commission. That will be a work session. Joe Lindsay, our city attorney, and I will be there. We'll be talking about land use processes, clear and objective standards and procedures. Also with the anticipation that the applicants will be going first on application presentations, followed by staff. And so it's another training opportunity to kind of go back through. You'll have the ability to do Q&A. That's the intent here, to have some kind of very specific examples of review process and criteria. We thought that would be helpful. So Joe and I are putting together a package for that. On April 25th, we have a series of what we're calling low-hanging fruit code updates. And that will be items such as the length of a partition, how long that's good for before it has to be requested for a continuance based on state law. Boundary line adjustments being type 1 versus type 2. Procedural issues that, as I mentioned, that having the applicant go first, addressing remands by city council to the planning commission to make that very clear in our code, and to I think those are the main ones that we've got on our items, but those are the items that we'll be covering. And then there will also be an appeal hearing for Old Mac that same night. So that's coming back to you. The council remanded that back to the planning commission on
That's on the 25th?
on April 25th.
Okay.
Then on May 9th, we may have one or two hearings. We have May 9th, American Welding, and there may be another hearing as well on that night. So that kind of covers about the next month roughly.
Okay.
And then just a few other updates. We have several members here tonight that will be involved in both housing and economic advisory groups. Commissioner Heeb and Councilor Member Hensley. Council President Hensley will be at our housing advisory committee tomorrow. And then Commissioner Padden, and Commissioner Jarosh will also be there as well for the Planning and Advisory Committee for Housing tomorrow at 6. And then the Economic Advisory Committee meeting is on Thursday. And Commissioner Padden and Councilor Stone will be present for that as well. We'll be giving you more information on that and updates. Those will deal with housing needs over the next 20 years, also affordability, which is a big issue. A lot of communities are struggling with that. And then the demographics will be something we'll also keep you posted on, which is what is the percentage of people that are having difficulty buying a home? And then kind of what is the city looking to do to address those issues? That's part of the housing. Economics can address things about the future of employment for our industrial lands and commercial lands, and what should those be? What target areas should we be looking at? So those are a few updates there. If you have any questions, I'm glad to answer them. Just wanted to give you a quick update.
Okay. Any questions on that? Okay, we'll move on. Thank you very much, Don. for that. And we'll move on to items of interest and guidance from the Planning Commission. Do any of the commissioners have guidance or items of interest?
Quick.
Commissioner Jarosh?
How many of you have seen Canby's historic preservation plan that was developed in 2020? No? Okay.
I'm not
I'm
one.
just asking because, this will come into play as we talk about housing density and things like that. So I'll make sure the city gets copies for everyone. I'll get them to you all. And then maybe in a meeting where we have 10 minutes, I'd like to talk about it. This, because I'm the chair of the Heritage and Landmark Commission. It was the Heritage and Landmark Commission that had this done. And it sort of guides us about, maintaining the heritage of our town and where we're going to have some challenges with, the neighborhood that's historical versus housing needs. And so it's a really interesting read because it was done by historians. So it's pretty good to read. So, okay, I just want to check who needed.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Anything else? I will just let folks know that on, it's all kind of a blur. I think Wednesday night, the mayor, council liaison Barwig, Don and I will be interviewing 2 individuals for the open position here on the Planning Commission. There was originally 3, but one of those individuals rescinded their application, so it's now back down to 2. And so hopefully by the next time we meet, we will have a full slate of commissioners. So if there's a tie that needs to be broken, I can actually break it, which I think is kind of what I'm supposed to do. So with that, was there anything else? Before we go, we don't normally have spectators. It's kind of awesome. Do you have anything you want to say? I know that I'm probably breaking rules asking, but how are you feeling?
I was going to ask if there is a maximum number of pods allowed in the city. Talk about that. I know you talked about cards, pods. So no maximum number of pods. It will be determined by parcel size, probably. And we allow them in all of our zones except residential. So hopefully we do see more than one.
There you go. Not a problem. Our pleasure. That's what we're here for. So with that, I
wanted to say real quick that I wasn't here. I've been on a lot of, as a business analyst, headed a lot of projects. I don't think any of them's taken a year though. So my hat's off to staff on this and all the members of the Planning Commission who've been working so long. I got to come in right at the end and see it over the finish line, which I'm super excited about. But I think this is an exciting thing for Canby, and I'm looking forward to it. And just something cool that we just get to do some cool stuff on Planning Commission.
yes,
It's great to be here.
and this is the whole thing between public and private. Private can just zoom, and public tends to kind of glow at a little bit of a glacial pace. That is the crux of our situation. So, bam. Okay, with that, I think I can entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
It's been moved,
I second.
seconded to adjourn. All those in favor of adjourning tonight signify by saying aye.
Hi.
Any oppositions? It is unanimous. We are adjourned. Thank you very much, Canby, and have a fantastic evening. See, now this